I wanna start just by thanking you all for getting here. It really makes a difference that you're here. But I actually believe also to the earth, that just putting our attention here starts something that makes a big difference. And it may have taken something to get here. It takes something different than it does to walk down the hall when we're all together in church. So I thank you for making that effort and invite you to keep looking around and seeing who else is here, since we don't get to have that in person now. But this is us. This is our church. This is a great subset of our church. And it is, as Psalm 133 says, you know, behold how good it is for brothers and sisters to dwell in unity together. And that is what we're going to do for the next hour. Most of you know me. I'm Susan Whitlock. I'm a member of the church since 1997. I was on staff for a few years in the early 2000s as a coordinator for singles ministries and the 20s and 30s program. Moved away in 2004, and by the grace of God, moved back in 2018. So I am very pleased to be back with you all again. And I want to thank, though they're not all here, but Diane just showed up. I want to thank the Adult Ed Committee and Jay for encouragement to think through this series about living with hope in the age of climate change. And especially to thank Amy Roof, who's been by my side as we planned and replanned it for the online world and is our technical host for Zoom today. So I wanted to actually invite you, Amy, to say anything that you need to say about the technical side of things.
Yeah, so right now y'all are muted, and for purposes of the bigger group meeting will stay muted so that we don't have any reverberation and can all hear Susan. You're going to be broken into groups for later in the meeting, so I'll be working on that while Susan talks. For right now, we're not going to use the chat very much today, just because neither Susan nor I will have a lot of opportunity to go back and look at it. So if you have a question, best thing we can do is for you to click on your participant button at the bottom, which brings up a list of people, and you'll be able to raise your hand from in that screen, and that's probably the best way to do it while we're in a group setting so that we can call on you. Any questions? Good. All right, Susan, back to you.
All right. Well, I have a bunch of notes, and who knows if I'll get to them or not. But what I wanted to say first is what we're not doing here today. And what we're not doing here today is going over a lot of facts and figures and scenarios about the climate change crisis. We're not doing that, not because I don't understand it fairly well, but I'm not probably in a position to talk about it. There's many of you here who know a whole lot more about it than I do. But more than that, that information is available in many, many places. And I think we all know places where we can go find it. And what I wanted to address more was our capacity to hear, to understand, to take in that information is increased the more that we have hope that something can be done about it. I thought about, as we've all been sort of living into the COVID crisis, we're finding the different ways that we each react to things that are overwhelming. For me, it's like this ping pong between like urgency and frenetic action and what can I do to help? And on the other side, it's like distraction, denial, paralysis, seeking comfort, just not dealing with it at all. And the climate change crisis has been around for a long time, longer than we were aware of it. We've even been aware of it for a very long time. But collectively, we've been far more on the side of denial, paralysis, and distraction and seeking comfort. When you think about the amount of media exposure on COVID-19 and how much we talk about it with each other all the time now, it's very different. The exposure of climate change over time, there has been a lot, but nothing like this. If you think of them both as a crisis, this is a crisis that has been on a deep back burner for a long time. And over the long term, its consequences are going to be far more devastating than COVID-19. So I wanted us to start this conversation, both because in church, both because we need to be talking about it everywhere, but also because there's an intricate relationship between our response to crises, that ping pong I described, and our sense of hope. And hope, of course, is one of the three great virtues that St. Paul touts to the Corinthians. These three remain: faith, hope, and love. It's the middle one. And so we know something about hope through our faith. We also know from experience that hopelessness leads directly to paralysis. Like when we need to distract ourselves and just not think about it, it's generally because we are so overwhelmed that we're not in touch with a sense of hope that anything could improve. And if we don't have hope, if we don't cling to hope, then as a species, we're not going to make the changes that we have to make to turn this situation around over the long term. So the question is, where do we find hope when the prognostications are so dire and the progress so hard to come by? And I have a couple of thoughts about that. One answer that Jay Sandiford brought to mind, brought to my mind, is a lovely piece of scripture from Jeremiah. Ah, Lord God, it is you who have made the heavens and the earth by your great power and by your outstretched arm. Nothing is too hard for you. And I think that we can believe that. But then there's the question of where we fit into the puzzle. Rick said this morning that we have to believe that our actions matter. And I actually think that that is one way that we could define hope, is in the belief that our actions matter, that what we learn and do and think and say is of consequence, that we don't give in to the feeling of being too small or too overwhelmed. Amy, do I have the ability to screen share? I think I do.
Yes, you do.
Okay, I wanna put this in the articulate words of someone else. This idea, oops, let me see. It's gonna take me a minute. I'm not a techno whiz. All right. And this is, can you all see the quote from Greta Thunberg? Amy, is it coming through?
It is not.
Darn. Okay, then you saw some weird stuff from my desktop. Oh well.
No,
So I'm gonna end screen share. Oh no, wait. Let me try one more time. Bear with me. Oh, never mind. Sorry. It was a pretty little poster, but what it says is Greta Thunberg, climate change activist, says it this way: when we start to act, hope is everywhere. So instead of looking for hope, look for action. Then the hope will come. So when we started thinking about this series for the church, the idea wasn't to spend Sunday mornings listening to more information and more information and more information and increasing our terror and our paralysis. But it was to emphasize actions that we all can take right now. Not because individual actions are enough to rein in climate change. They are not. We are going to have to make big changes in the way the world operates, and particularly the way the global economy operates, if we're going to keep this from getting further out of control. But again, without the sense of our own power to act, we risk losing hope. And that limits our capacity to face the big picture in the ways that we need to. So then comes COVID, and what action can look like right now is a little different than when I started thinking about this series 6 or 8 years ago. 6 or 8, not years, months. So for instance, today, what we were supposed to be doing was following our meeting, joining together and having a work day in the Ann Arbor City Parks, led by the Natural Area Preservation Group. And we would have been pulling invasive weeds, and we would have been given a picture of how that actually matters in the face of climate change, because the invasive weeds that are all over our city and our world threaten biodiversity. And biodiversity is one of the things that makes us most resilient in the face of change. So that's something we would have been doing together, and we can't do that. We will someday, I promise. I will set one up when we're allowed to do that again, but instead we're here. Interestingly, as you've, I'm sure, read and seen for yourselves, inaction right now is making a big difference. The inaction that has been enforced to control the spread of the coronavirus has had remarkable effects on the environment all over the world. Satellite imagery has shown air pollution clearing. I hope you all have seen it, but we're going to put a link when this goes up on the YouTube site so that you can see air pollution just clearing over China during the first few weeks of this crisis. In Venice, the lack of boat traffic has allowed the water in the canals to settle, and residents have seen fish and dolphin that have been invisible for years. I also heard somebody said there's packs of coyotes wandering around downtown Pasadena. I haven't looked that one up, but you know, stuff is changing just because we have slowed things down and we're not pouring as much into the air. And I imagine things also change for animals because there's less noise, there's less traffic. And you likely have other examples. I want to emphasize that these temporary changes aren't going to get us out of the climate crisis at all. But consider this. There are estimates that cleaner air in China in the wake of the pandemic will save the lives of 4,000 children under 5 and 73,000 adults over 70, just because they will have cleaner air to breathe for a while. And I have to assume that the blue skies that some parts of India are seeing for the first time in months, if not years, are going to have a similar effect. What I think is most important about these kinds of temporary changes is that they can inspire us. They can, as Rick was talking about, they can reconnect us to the earth and to the environment, and they can nourish our hope. When we stop poisoning our ecosystem, it moves to heal very quickly. One of the best metaphors I've heard recently to think about the climate crisis is to compare it to a sink overflowing in a bathroom. For a while, it seems like it's incremental change, but at some point, things start to change very quickly, and they start to change structurally. You know, at some point, the floor is going to collapse, and that's going to affect every other place in your house. And if the water is still running, if you try to mop it up, you don't really get anywhere. But if you turn off the tap, then you can begin to mop things up and you can actually see progress. And I think that's a great way to think about what we have to do. We have to turn off the tap of our carbon emissions. That's ultimately the biggest action that as a species we have to pull off, and inaction and slowing down will be a part of that. But the reason that I called this starting the conversation, this first moment in our series, is that there's another kind of action that we can start taking today, and that is in our relationships to the earth, but also to each other. Like Amy said, in a minute, we're going to put you through the magic of Zoom into random listening pairs with a few questions to share and to listen to each other. And this, like so many things, can seem like it's not that big a deal and it's not that big a step. But I would argue that this is taking action, and that it's taking a very necessary, if not sufficient, action to transforming our world. Certainly, everybody deserves to be listened to on scary and disturbing topics. Rick talked this morning about paying attention to creation. Paying attention to creation also means paying attention to each other. And things are less scary, and we can feel more hopeful when we feel less alone with it. But it's more than that. We can scientifically model something now. And if I could screen share, which I wish I had figured out ahead of time, maybe I can figure this out to be put up on as a link later. According to a graphic from the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, we can actually show now that how humans cooperate or don't will directly affect how devastating the impacts of climate change are, even if we're not able to keep the global temperature where we want it to be. So even at 3 degrees Celsius of warming, which is twice as high as is the aim of the Paris Agreement, I believe, even at that point, if we approach things through cooperation, through sustainability, the impacts in terms of desertification and other issues will be massively less than if we just continue with business as usual, which is everybody competing for resources, nobody wanting to work together. So again, I assume that if we can figure out acting cooperatively, we also have a better chance at mitigating the changes and keeping the temperature low. But even if we couldn't, how we respond will make this huge difference to the impact on us as a species. And that I find to be exciting and also very much in line with our faith. You know, Jesus's great commandments to love God with all our heart and soul and mind and strength, and to love our neighbors as ourselves are directly relevant here. If we love God, we respect the earth that God created and that God still belongs to God. And if we love our neighbors as ourselves, we actually all have a better chance of survival. So I want to we're going to go into our listening pairs in a moment. And let's see. Well, I wanted to just check and see if anybody has any burning questions before we do that. If you do, just unmute yourself and wave and unmute yourself. Okay. So Amy and I had talked about this, and a couple people are there together. You know, you're watching together. We had hoped that those parents who are here would be willing to let their young people have the computer for the listening pair. We have 2 teens with us, which is terrific, Kira and Ethan. And if your parents are willing, you will be a pair for this. And then the rest will happen a little bit randomly. But what we're going to do is go into pairs. We'll do this twice. We'll come back in between. And I'll give you a question. And each of you, I'm sure, has a smartphone somewhere around so that you can time yourselves. But what I'd like people to do is to take 4 minutes each. And you decide who goes first, who goes second. 1 to be the listener, 1 to be the sharer. And the listener, in this case, is going to truly try to just listen, not agree, not offer advice, not say that, yeah, that happened to me too, but really practice just receiving it in a delighted way what the other person is sharing. We all get very skittish about sharing things because all of us have the tendency to want to jump in and very kindly switch the mode to ourselves. Oh, you said that. Oh, that reminds me of this for me. We're going to try to make space here and not do that. And what I'd like people to consider in this first round is the question, what is your connection to the earth? I think we need to start this whole conversation in a very personal place. And yeah, whatever that means to you, memories, special places, anything at all that it means to you. And let's do, looking at the time, I said 4, but let's do 3 minutes each. And at the end of that time, you should get a message from Amy as host telling you when we're gonna come back into the main room. So Amy, are we set to do this? And do you have any other thoughts you wanna say?
No, we're good to go. There's a couple groups of 3, so I'll just bear that in mind. We'll probably be a little longer.
Okay.
So I'll probably set it for about 10 minutes in each room, and that should give everybody 3 minutes to talk.
Great. Okay. So if you're a 3-way, do 3 minutes each. And if you're a 2-way, you can probably do 4.5 minutes each. All right. Have fun. See you back. What is your connection to the earth? I wanted to say that to people who might be watching this recorded later on the YouTube channel, that this is something you could certainly do either with somebody that you live with or call someone up on the phone and just agree to spend a few minutes listening to each other on this question of what is your connection to the earth. And that would be a great thing to do. For those of us who are here in the present, in real time together, what was that like? What was good? What was hard? Any reactions at all to that exercise, or what you learned about yourself?
We discovered we have very similar interests,
Uh,
but that's not too surprising since we have self-selected to become part of this class.
yeah, true. Any other thoughts?
I guess until you mentioned or asked the question, I'd really somewhat thought about it, but it's not something that you suddenly develop, or at least in my case, it wasn't. And I think that was true for the other people that were in my group. In other words, it had often been cultivated as a child, even though you didn't necessarily put the words to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes sense. Anything else? I don't know why my phone's being loud right now. I think of this kind of listening to each other as a way, in a sense, a kind of spiritual discipline, and one I practice a lot. And yet I still find it hard as the listener not to say something, not to try to be encouraging, or not to ask a question, or, it's hard. It is hard. And I think it's a worthy pursuit. But one other thing I wanted to say on this question of connection with the earth, and it's not even idea, it's more of an idea than a fully formed thought, but is that around the world, but in this country in particular, we have a connection to the earth from where we may have grown up, but that connection to the earth was allowed by the superseding of another people's connection to the earth, that we all are on ground that was taken from other people, which is sort of the absolute opposite of the kind of cooperative, sustainable approach that we need in the face of where the world is right now. And so I just felt moved to say that, not because I have a lot of knowledge here, but we are living on Anishinaabe territory here in Michigan. And that just somehow seems important to acknowledge when we talk about our connection to the earth. We did, in our little time together, Amy and I helped me figure out screen sharing. So I do want to just quickly try again to show you this this graph from the IPCC. So if I go to share screen, can you all see
Yeah.
Yeah.
this graph?
Yeah.
So this is assuming 3 degrees of warming. You can see the degrees of warming go up from the bottom. Where we are, the sort of gray bar in the first third of the chart, that's where we are now, approximately. And 1.5 degrees in the middle there is what we want to target. And the chart goes up to 3 degrees, to twice that. And with these 3 categories, desertification, land degradation, and food insecurity, the lighter the color, the better for us, the lower the level of impact. And SSP1 here is essentially a socioeconomic approach that involves more cooperation and attention to sustainability, whereas SSP3 is business as usual, where regions are competing for resources. And you can see, if you compare these two, if we take the sustainable cooperative approach, even at 3 degrees of warming, we're still in the yellow, we're still in the moderate risk category. Whereas if we're competing with each other, we're in really extreme, what's the word? Significant irreversibility land. And then land degradation, we can't do quite as much as around desertification, but still we're in the red zone as opposed to the purple zone. And then with food insecurity, again, we see a really remarkable difference if we can find the way to cooperate with each other. So that to me is an incredibly hopeful piece and an incredibly important piece about how we approach or how we address climate change, and something that we know through our faith is the key. I did want to say earlier, and I forgot, that another thing that we have learned, I think, from the COVID crisis is that when scientists are warning us that there is a real threat to our health and our lives, we should listen to them. And scientists have been warning us about this for over 30 years now about climate change. And it's a great time to heed the call. Before we close, I wanted to have us go back just very briefly into those same groups and look at another question, and in some ways a harder question, but an important question, which is what is your climate change story to date? What have you experienced, or what has caught your attention, or what do you know? If it doesn't seem like you personally have a climate change story yet, then I would phrase it this way. What are you afraid is already lost? These are hard questions and they bring up feelings, and it is fine to have feelings about them. But I think it's important to listen to each other. What are you afraid we can't get back? And or what have you been experiencing? So we'll just let's take 6 minutes total. This doesn't give us a lot of time. It's a little bit more in the 2-way than in the 3-way. But again, try to split the time evenly, and each of us just gets a chance to say. And any questions before we do that?
There we go.
Yeah.
Why reinvent the wheel when you can take a picture and share that instead?
That's the other thing she was going to share.
No, it's quite wise for something come from teenagers, right? Amazing.
Hope is everywhere. So instead of looking for correction, then the hope will come. Okay.
Susan,
Yes.
may I just share the watershed to answer the question? 1 second. It's just
Yeah, sure.
Here. So indeed, you have the entire watershed. Can you see my screen?
Oh,
Okay.
beautiful.
So this is the water. This is in fact the concentration of detergent in the different watershed in the entire.
Oh, wow. Wow.
And
Detergent?
the watershed is here. The Mississippi is so big. I mean, it's interesting to see going down here. But what is interesting is still a bit of hope is you see the difference that make basically wastewater treatment plants. This is a release of detergent. We are mostly connected here to wastewater treatment plants. Mexico is not entirely, and that makes this is much higher concentration in the flows. So we make a difference. I mean, in fact, our water quality is better than in the 75 or something like that. Still not great with the eutrophication. I mean, but we can make a difference. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Beautiful.
Wow. Scary.
Okay. Any thoughts coming back from the second sharing time, either about the process or what you came up with? Anything anyone wants to say?
I'll just, Rick, I loved when Rick pointed out the comparison with, COVID-19 is teaching us very concretely how each individual's actions adds up to, something tangible. And then our conversation was about a little bit about individual actions and how those are only added in, like other things have to happen too, but without them, this isn't going to happen. So, individual actions are important, and they help, like he said, push down on the curve, and our little part of the curve, like just we can push down on our part of the curve. And I love that.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, the young kids here, Kira and Ethan, I think they both actually emphasize the same thing. They're afraid of the extinction of some species that today's we see. It's interesting. I mean, it's sad that actually in the last 20, 30 years, there's some species or animals that no longer around, and 20 or 30 years is actually pretty short time of period of time. We're not talking about, I miss seeing dinosaurs like million years ago here, but it's just think that the climate actually will affect some of the species that 20, 30 years down the road, when Ethan and Kira's, generation have their own kids, their kids cannot see some of the species that we see, which is really, really sad.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Who else?
Yeah, there was an article about the relationship between climate change and COVID-19, right? We really have no idea what the effects of climate change are going to be. Can't predict, but the onset of pandemics and other diseases and so forth and so on is one of the things that's probably going to happen. So it's very direct.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the best I've heard about in terms of this particular pandemic is that the relationship isn't very direct about climate change, but it's indirect in that the same, one of the drivers of climate change is deforestation, and deforestation is also implicated in this particular pandemic, how there's less room for all the living things, including viruses. We're making less and less room, and therefore things are getting from one environment into another. Yeah.
I just say it was for me shocking to see in Tasmania, a Tasmanian tiger, stuffed animal, and this species is gone. I mean, people have entirely killed it.
Yeah.
And that's you see, that was irreversible, and that was yeah.
Well, deforestation causes climate change, but then climate change. Talk to the people in California. That caused a lot of deforestation in California, right? So it's
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Feedback loop, right? I mean,
Yeah, absolutely. Snowballs. Yeah. Well, I want to make a couple of announcements and then end on a maybe a slightly higher note. So this will be posted on the YouTube site later and after 2 today. And when it's posted there, you'll also find links to a couple of things. Greta Thunberg's TED Talk, if any of you haven't seen that, will be linked there. The Presbyterian Church USA has some documents about commitments around climate care that will be posted. Not remembering everything we're posting there. Some information about, there's a link to Ann Arbor's plan for carbon neutrality by 2030. Various stuff. There's a site called Skeptical Science, which is actually can be a lot of fun. It's skeptical of the people who are skeptical of science around climate change. So it's helpful in terms of if there's something that people say that you're like, that's so wrong, but I don't know how to, I don't know what's right. This may have an answer for you. It's kind of fun. And also, many of you probably already know, but Earth Day, which is Wednesday, there will be 3 days of online activities that many environmental groups are contributing to, called Earth Day Live. So there will be a link to Earth Day Live on the site too. And I think it'd be great for everybody to think about what's one small personal action that you can take this Earth Day, whether it's, picking up trash or drying your clothes by air instead of in the dryer, whatever. That's one of my favorite ones. But just something so that you're taking an action here. Following this, next week we have Grace Jisun Kim talking to us about climate justice at this hour next week. We'll have, at another point, on Mother's Day, we have LaRon Williams doing storytelling about Mother Earth. I'm not going to go through everything in the series right now, but stay tuned to this space because really fun things and different things will be happening each week. And the last announcement I had was about the Climate Church, Climate World book group that's starting. There is a sign up on the website, on the church's website. We have ordered. You can certainly get the book as an ebook now, and you may be able to get it delivered to you personally from bookshop.org. But we do have a couple of books coming in next week that will be by Thursday at the latest. We should have 10 copies of the book. So if you are interested in doing that with us, sign up on the website and let us know if you need a copy of the book, and we'll try to figure out getting that to you. So I thought, Amy, are there any other announcements we need to make?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Okay, so here's what I thought we could do it before we say goodbye is for each person who's still on the call on the meeting, you can say your name and then just say, what is one thing you're already doing to help reduce carbon emissions or to help the environment in another way? And if you don't mind, for the sake of time, I want to honor people's times, I will just follow the order that is on my screen and call on you. So take a half a minute to think what's just one thing you're already doing, and we will what's the word? We will get ideas from each other by doing this. So let's see, Martha, would you begin? Your name and one thing you already do?
Well, Martha, and I have more and more tried to source our food as locally as possible, or pay attention and try not to buy food that's coming from halfway around the world.
Great, thank you. Gottliebsons. Got to unmute. Hold on 1 minute, Carol. We got you. You need to unmute. Amy, can you help them with that?
Coming off.
Okay, there we go.
We're definitely walking more, driving less.
I can attest to that. We're not driving much.
Great. Olivier.
We have insulated our house, which made us go from higher than average, I mean, all houses to 20% better than the best houses. And I discovered yesterday was linked to electricity consumption. So changing all your bulbs, taking low consumption things.
Good. Thank you. Felicity.
Probably recycling plastic bags or plastic anything. Yeah, recycling. I find I have far more in my recycle than I do in my other bin. I have hardly anything in my other bin. So yeah, recycling, even food if I can. Mm-hmm.
Delina.
Hi, I'm not very, I'm Delina Harrison, and maybe you can see a little behind me. I'm actually got some little plants growing there. I'm trying to garden a bit more. I started that last year, so I'm using my resources that I have now, so I can get that going.
Mark?
Yes, so my name is Mark Mattis. One of the things we're trying to do is actually build a compost to do some composting here at our house. So it's fun and exciting.
Yeah, food waste is a huge part of climate stuff. Kathy, unmute yourself first. Oops, you got muted again. Hold on, sorry, technical issue. Amy, can you help out there? Kathy, there you go.
Okay. I walk wherever I can. If it's under 3 miles, I'll probably be walking instead of driving.
Great. Renee?
I wish we could walk. We live out in the boonies, so we can't. I'm trying to get my family to not waste food and not, try to eat up as much food and not waste it. And I love putting stuff outside to dry. It's like, I think that is just one of it's just great because your clothes smell so nice after you bring stuff in, if you can, dry it out. Socks and towels and other things you have to put in the dryer so they're not stiff, but yeah.
Yeah, great, thank you. Kibblers.
Yeah, well, in addition to insulating the house, for a while I've been working on driving down phantom loads, or if you have DTE Insight app, the always on, so electrical loads that never turn off. And I've gotten the house down to about 85 watts now, which I think is pretty good.
So that's because things are plugged in, they're always drawing electricity. Is that what you're talking about?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell them about your app.
Yeah. Well, I just did. Yeah.
Yeah. If I leave something on overnight, I know
it. Phillips. Ethan and Keith.
Unmute.
And Sarah.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, a lot of the things that people have already mentioned, we have a drying rack. We hang a lot of clothes on that to dry. What was the other thing? Oh yeah, we keep the thermostat low in the winter to try and minimize that.
Great.
All low is low.
Yeah.
Oh, about 62. We wear lots of sweaters and blankets.
Yeah. Good. Ethan, anything else you wanted to say?
Oh, kind of we don't waste a ton of food. We have a lot of leftovers and stuff, and There's always Tupperware things in our fridge with something in it.
Great.
Stuff like
Thank
that.
you. Mary.
Well, I would say we're doing a much better job of eating all the food we have in the refrigerator. And we do a lot of walking now. I haven't, we've been home 3 weeks from a trip that we took, and I have not filled my gas tank. So I feel pretty good about that.
Yeah, terrific.
We have low consumption lights. That really has helped a lot. And like, we don't use the dryer and the dishwasher if we can help it.
Great. Susan?
Susan, mine have been said. It's recycling, composting, and eating all the food.
Great. Collins, Lyra, and Kira. Oh,
there you go. So yeah, we recycled, very strict with, recycling. We use less energy consumption in the house, not just the light. If there's nothing, we don't need to turn it on, then we don't turn it on. We're trying to strict in terms of washing our clothes also, instead of doing it every other day, like a lot of household. We usually do it just once a week, and making sure that we always have like a full load instead of, wasting the water and also electricity. So I think that's about it. Yeah.
Kira, anything else you wanted to say?
Well, we use a lot of the reusable bags for the grocery. There's a bunch that are just in the trunk of our car, so we have easy bags.
We don't use plastic bag anymore.
Good, thank you. Pam.
I had a really unique opportunity when I moved here in 2013. I bought my condo so that I could fix it up the way I wanted to. So at the moment, I do a lot of these things. My heat, I keep between 65 and 68 degrees during the cold weather, and I keep it about 80 in the summertime. But I have gotten energy efficient air conditioner, kitchen appliances. I've had my attic insulated and my basement insulated, and what else? I recycle. I'm very into this as much as I can. I worry about the system here in Ann Arbor, that I know it's going toward the right idea, but it's not there yet. So it's kind of a lifestyle with me now.
Yeah, thank you. Diane.
Well, one of the things we did this last fall was to replace our windows, which were the original windows in the house. So we began to realize they probably weren't as energy efficient as they should be. So we did replace those. And I think the other one is to do recycling fairly consistently and religiously. And as Felicity said, we have much more in our recycle bin than we do in our trash bin. So I think you start to see how much it makes you aware of how much packaging and containers you have, and to start to think about how are there ways you can avoid that.
Great, thank you. Amy?
Yeah, so just to piggyback off Diane, I look at the packaging of the items that I'm purchasing and minimize the amount of excess packaging that I'm purchasing in the goods that I'm purchasing, and recycling. That's interesting. And also just making sure that I, eat locally and organic as much as I can too.
Before I say mine, I want to say one thing I did want to underline is that on May 24th, which is Memorial Day weekend, when we fear that we will not all be able to travel like we might once have done, we have a great opportunity that in this hour, we're going to try to do by Zoom an intergenerational forum, expressly so that younger people in the church can talk to some of us older people about what this looks like, what climate change looks like to them, given that they'll be living with it for longer than we likely will. So I want to do a special plug for that. In terms of carbon emissions, I take the bus whenever I can. Last year, I figured out that I could, in the fall, I have a farm share up on Nixon Road, and I can bike there, and it's about 4 miles. And when I get there, if I've biked, I get an extra pound of food than if over if I drive. And I've started doing what I always should have been doing, which is for items that I can get refilled at the People's Food Co-op, I just use the same jar or container over and over again so that I don't even have to think about what I'm going to do with that next plastic piece. So that's been going well. Thank you all very much. Thank you for staying a little extra as we worked out the kinks and the bugs this first time. And please come back next week for an interview with Grace Jisun Kim about climate change and about why about climate justice around the globe and why we should care. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.